Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Just your attention for a few moments before the meeting starts. Just the usual safety announcements. There are emergency exits at the back of the room, and there's another one here behind us. And if you need any assistance, there's members of the Policing Authority staff around the room, so just ask them. As usual, the event's streamed live, so I suppose two things to remember. One is switch the phones off, and second, you could be recorded as part of the record. The other thing is silence, please, at all times. And if you need to leave the room, just try and do it as quietly as possible. As usual, the meeting is an engagement between the authority and the Garda Commissioner, and members of the audience are here just purely to observe, and there'll be no opportunity for anybody to participate in the meeting. Thank you very much. Josephine.
Helen. Good afternoon, everybody. Fault your oath, Commissioner. You're very welcome to your first formal engagement with the Policing Authority. My colleagues and I were happy to meet you upstairs, first of all, in private session, and obviously we've had some informal engagement at committee level and so on since you were appointed. By way of explanation to the audience, the nature of our agenda today is somewhat different from usual because clearly you're less than 4 weeks in office, and so we've characterised the agenda broadly as an exchange of views with yourself, between yourself and the authority members on a range of topics. There are a couple of specifics on the agenda which I'm sure your colleagues will be able to help us with, but in terms of some of the big ticket items, as I say, recognising the shortness of your period in office, we're treating them as a broad exchange of views, and we're not expecting chapter, verse, and the last halfpenny to be explained or accounted for. And I just want to say that because it's a little bit different from our usual meetings. It would be unreasonable otherwise. I'd like, because it's your first meeting, Commissioner, to invite you, first of all, if there's any opening remarks that you'd like to make on the occasion of your first meeting with the authority.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much for the engagement in the private session where we were able to go into some more sensitive areas in more depth, and I felt that was a very appropriate exchange. Can I thank you and the rest of the authority for your very warm welcome to my first public meeting here today. These meetings and our interactions with the policing authority are very important. They're an opportunity for Garda Síochána to be held to account, and to be held to account as it should be in any advanced democratic society. And it's entirely appropriate that we're here and that we're held to account in public, in particular how well we're doing in terms of delivering both an efficient and an effective policing service. If I may, I would like to touch on some of the operational successes that I've noted since my arrival and cover the period of August. And I touch upon these because one of the things I've been struck by is the quality of all the staff and members of Garda Síochána that I've met in my travels around the organisation. I've found very many fine people within this organisation, and it gives me great optimism for what can be achieved. So, if I may say that I wish to congratulate the significant work undertaken in both Dublin and Knock to ensure that the people visit took place safely and securely and with minimum disruption. And this was achieved through major planning and interagency cooperation. In addition, we struck many major blows against organised crime, and in particular I'd point to the conviction of Freddie Thompson, and that was a world-class investigation that was conducted here in Dublin, and I've met the investigation team myself and complimented on them on their commitment and professionalism in bringing sufficient evidence to bear to secure that conviction. Only over the weekend there was a huge seizure of cash, almost amounting now to 2 million, and that is very significant in terms of degrading that organised crime group. And if anybody in business will know how difficult it is to make £2 million worth of profit, and there we have taken that from them and they've lost their ill-gotten gains. In further activity, there's also been major seizures of drugs and also weapons seized in the Dublin area. I visited the Criminal Assets Bureau on Friday, who are conducting numerous investigations which run into the hundreds. But a couple of items that did stick out was the successful seizure of 10 high-end luxury vehicles from a car dealership in Dublin. And it's been reported, and it is true, that criminal gangs are now using high-level vehicles, high-value vehicles, in effect to barter in place of cash. And so that is something we're alive to and that we're pursuing. And if there's one thing better than locking criminals up, it's taking all their ill-gotten gains off them. So this is work which I am infused by and which I will support in my tenure as Commissioner. And it sends a strong message out to society, in particular to gang members, that if they're enjoying a lavish lifestyle, it's not going to be for very long. Other work is carried out to protect the individuals and communities and our society. Recently, there's been property recovered from separate burglaries in Cavan and Meath, together with arrests, prevention of ATM skimming operations, and a number of incidents in both Dublin and Donegal where our negotiators de-escalated situations where people were threatening to take their own lives. And the arrest of an individual in Donegal for speeding, who then rammed a Garda vehicle in which the members received minor injuries. And this incident, together with the incident in Limerick, demonstrates the dangers that Garda members face on a day-to-day basis. In Limerick in late August, a patrol vehicle was struck by a loose horse and 2 members were injured, one of them quite seriously. And we wish them well in their recovery, in their speedy recovery. In terms of road safety, I've met now on a number of occasions with RSA officials, and we will continue also on our focus on road safety. Road deaths are only slightly down where we were last year, but that was the lowest year for road deaths on record since 1959. But we can't and won't be complacent. Every road death is one too many and is a terrible trauma visited on family and friends, and one which we must work hard to reduce together with society and its response. And I'll just highlight the recent European Day Without a Road Death, which saw no road deaths here in Ireland, and shows what can be achieved through drivers slowing down, wearing their seatbelt, and not drinking under the influence of either drink or drugs, but also taking care and being considered in their journeys. In terms of just organisational change, there's been a recent promotion list to Detective Inspector published, and that allows those officers to be assigned in order to help prevent and detect crime both at national and local level. But also then, we've cleared a sergeant's list today, and I'm pleased to say in the forthcoming days there'll be 170 promotions to sergeant, which will be welcome news in the organisation. There are also very positive advances being made, and I'll point in first to behaviours within the organisation and the importance of the Code of Ethics. The Code of Ethics is central to all that we do. I've emphasised it in all of my visits to stations. It's the ethos and culture, and will be central to that. We rightfully expect then that everyone in the organisation should be aware and trained in the Code of Ethics, and that will happen by December, but also acknowledge its importance by signing the Code of Ethics as well, and we're working towards that end too. We wish to be and will be a human rights-based policing service that meets the needs of society, in particular those who are most vulnerable in our society. Last week, the Commission on the Future of Policing in Ireland reported, and they provided a roadmap for change for Garda, Síochána and others for the next 3 to 5 years. I'm not going to comment on every single recommendation as it pertains to Garda Síochána, but what we are concentrating on is what the new operating model may look like for Garda Síochána when we take on the feedback that's been provided and the recommendations provided by the Commission. But we hope then to provide a police service that is rooted in the community, responsive to local needs, but also has the technology and equipment and the skills and the staff to meet a rapidly changing policing environment. And I also note why we're here today. We're here for the purpose of being subject to accountability and oversight, and also that the Commission on Policing made recommendations in respect of that. But I would say, for my part, that until that is levelled off, we know exactly what is ahead of us. I am legislatively and morally and ethically responsible for being held to account by this policing authority, and we intend to continue with a positive and open relationship with the policing authority, and so that we are shown to be entirely accountable, open and transparent in our dealings and how we deliver policing here in Ireland. And so we look forward then to working with the policing authority on a regular basis and with the individual members of the authority in the months and indeed maybe years to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Commissioner, and thank you for those closing remarks are particularly important because, as we discussed in private session, the authority has a job to do until it doesn't, or may never not have it to do, because the government has announced a consultation process and an implementation process, which we indicated in a statement we issued this morning. We look forward to participating in determining, or at least contributing to the determination of next steps in relation to policing oversight. We would share with you your congratulations to your officers in relation to the Freddie Thompson investigation, as echoed by the judge indeed. Exceptional police work, and one would have to be blind not to notice significant uptick in activity and successful activity around organised crime, and indeed not so organised, right across the organisation in the last number of months. All very welcome and all very much appreciated, I have no doubt, by the community. I would like to join with you in wishing the officers in Limerick well and a speedy recovery, in particular to the officer who was hurt, and very pleased to note that promotions will be proceeding, because it simply has been such a gap in your supervision structures. So it will be really good for you, no doubt, and your colleagues, and indeed particularly for the frontline Gardaí, to have the support of supervisors in the coming months as you make those appointments. So I think that's all to be welcomed. Your assurance in relation to the Code of Ethics is also something we're very pleased to hear, and I know my colleagues will have some questions about that as the meeting progresses. You had indicated, and in your public statements, that you had concerns about Garda resources and you were going to be having a look at them. And maybe, I'm not suggesting that you've finished having a look at them or that your review is completed, but I thought it might be helpful if we could have a sense of your assessment at this point in relation to resources, and then maybe my colleagues might have a couple of questions in relation to that, if you'd like to share with us your thoughts in relation to Garda resources.
Okay, well, thank you very much. So, well, our resources have been in the headline, particularly since overtime has been reduced. It hasn't been abolished, but it has been reduced, and that was a necessary act in terms of bringing our budget back under control. But beyond that, we get 1.65 billion, and we'll have received that this year. So very substantial sum of money. And I said, I think in my very first days, I want to understand precisely how that is being spent and to what end. And to do that, I need to understand the demand that the organisation faces. So that's both the proactive demand, what's required of us, in effect, what comes in through the door, what are we asked to attend, what requests the public make of us, but also then the proactive element of our demand. So they could point to the organised crime work, the work of CAB, the work of other proactive units in tackling and preventing crime and keeping people safe in this society. So an understanding of demand, because if we understand demand, then we understand the resources that we have and what actually 1.65 billion buys, then we can decide what our service delivery is and how we prioritise our service delivery. But even these things are not at a steady state at any moment, because also then we're undergoing a process of workforce modernisation or civilianisation. We are displacing Garda officers and Garda members, sworn members, by the employment of Garda staff. And so again, that is there's an efficiency in that, but also it improves our effectiveness because we're putting sworn officers back into frontline duties in whatever shape they might be. And frontline duties, it now is a wide gambit of policing activity, and so it can go right from community policing through to investigation of serious crime. And more of what we do isn't in a public space. More of what we do is in a more hidden space, so dealing with serious sexual assault, dealing with domestic abuse, dealing with child sexual exploitation, or dealing with cybercrime, or child abuse online. So those are things people can't see on the streets, but they are very much frontline duties. And in looking at our demand, the resources that we have, I have to make determinations about where our priorities should be.
Any of my colleagues want to ask questions about resources specifically? Because if not, I'll keep asking them. Pat?
Maybe just one, Commissioner. Do you feel you have enough information, you have enough expertise within Garda Síochána to deliver the information, including financial information, to make a call on the resources you require?
Well, we have to say we have information, so we know how many people we employ, we know what it costs, we know what our crime figures are, and the recording of those on our data quality is improving. We know what our trends have been over the last 3 to 5 years, and so that gives us an indication as to where demand's going to be in the next 3 to 5 years. If we look outside this jurisdiction to other neighbouring jurisdictions, we can see what the trends are across the rest of Western Europe. All of those things inform us. And the general trends are a rise in crime, and also reporting of crime against the vulnerable. And that's to be encouraged, because quite often the vulnerable are suffering really serious offences and not reporting those. So we want to be in a position where we are turning those stones over, actively looking for offences, and also then looking for crime reporting as well. So that in part is what I mean around understand what our demand is and where our demand might go in the future. But I think we'll probably always be in a deficit of information in that policing covers such a wide continuum of activities and requirements, and indeed, often we are the service of last resort for individuals, but at the same time, we often help people in their hour of need, and it's very hard to find where in the Garda Síochána Act that particular act of kindness or help is covered. But that is important as well around community confidence. So taking all of that into account, we still have to prioritise what we do and decide where we want to put our priority in terms of where our resources are and what our resources will look like in the future. So investigators who are well equipped for dealing with serious domestic abuse or serious sexual assault, or indeed dealing with organised crime.
Molling?
I'm encouraged, Commissioner, by what you say. You may well be aware that the authority has been seeking for most of the period of our existence, has been looking for a workforce plan, because we feel there needs to be strategic underpinning in terms of the utilisation of resources and the planning in terms of both current and future needs. In terms of what we might expect from the future in the light of the work that you're currently doing, when might we expect an actual workforce plan which the authority might consider or be informed of?
Well, in some ways I'm arriving in a crest of the wave of work that's already well started and underway. But if we look to what the Commission of Policing has said and the work that we've already undertaken and what the divisional policing model will look like going forward, so certainly the Commission has emphasised the importance of local delivery and talks about district policing, but within an envelope of divisional policing, which in effect I think will be one of the main building blocks of the organisation going forward. So division headed by a chief superintendent. They will have an element of autonomy around local delivery, resourcing, but also then the systems and personnel support in order to deliver that local service, all within the tramlines of a corporate framework as well. But they will have a lot of local accountability. But that's underway. We're pretty close to a proof of concept in 4 divisions, and so that is literally only, I think, a month and a half away from starting. And so then we want to learn the lessons from that quickly. This is a new approach, but I think already we can, in actually designing it out and doing it in effect on a desktop, we can see some of the issues that arise. And I know John had a meeting about that this morning. But we want to work quickly on this, and the next bit then is the demand piece. Now, the demand piece is a considerable project because we've talked about the proactive demand and the reactive demand. There's also the internal demand. So what does our own bureaucracy cost us, and how can we find easements or efficiencies within that as well? And that is the work of many months, and if I said a year, so that we can get a fair understanding of what both reactive and proactive demand is, but also then when we go to this sort of new unit of an operating model, that'll help us around what our internal demand is, because one of the objects of that is to try and remove bureaucracy and allow decision making at a lower level within the organisation.
Can we anticipate, Commissioner, that you'll be providing us with information on an ongoing basis in relation to the progress on this, rather than reaching a situation in which you feel you've got the final configuration prepared and can then be shared 12 months down the road? Is quite a bit.
I think I'll be overly optimistic if I ever get the final configuration that I'm content with. So I think in the absence of that, I'll be keeping you briefed as we go along, because some of this, there's an art to this as well, and the art is making sure that we don't fall into the trap of, every widget has to look the same in terms of the divisions, that there should be an element then which is responsive to the fears and concerns and the character of the local community and its geography.
Thank you, Commissioner. Anybody down here want to ask anything? One of the other pieces, sorry Valerie, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I was just wondering if you wanted to make any comment or observation on resources as it affects the frontline Garda in terms of equipment, accommodation, what they need to do their job on a daily basis.
Well, I think one of the things that I have noted, and that's why I'm talking about our internal demand, is it's still very much, there's a lot of paper in the organisation. The IT systems, which are under development, should help in respect of starting to lift that workload away from individuals. We have agreed that we will go to a new uniform, for instance, and that was featured in the cultural audit, obviously. And so, final design and procurement of that will follow. But also then, the very fabric of the buildings that they're working in, some of the buildings are not, as you would hope. And so, undoubtedly, some of our members are working in conditions which are difficult for them in terms of the amount of staff there may be in a station, and the availability of IT to them, for instance. So those are all issues that we wish to address, but they're well enough known in the organisation. It's just now getting the programme in place through MRP to make sure we start actually making an effect there. But there's also a considerable amount of money involved in that as well, in terms of delivering that change in equipment and systems as well.
Thanks. One of the topics we discussed in private session, Commissioner, was an approach to the next policing plan, and we've agreed to extend the current one by a few months just to allow some of that thinking and work that you're doing to develop, and that's something we're very happy to do. The authority has been keen for a while to begin to move towards a costed plan, even in broad parameters. Not necessarily micro-costing is a big leap, but in terms of your review of resources, is that part of your thinking, that we might be able in the next policing plan to start with some broad brush costings? Or is that too soon?
Well, I think it depends how broad the brush is. So
We'd settle for any brush.
So we can
actually.
Yeah, we can start to cost it, and then once we get into that discipline, we can start to inform that more and more. But whenever you're deciding on priorities, where you spend your money, in some ways dictates what your priorities are. So, and the amount of resources that you, obviously then the amount of resources that flow from that. So one will flow from the other. Once we have there's a piece then, and as we talked about what the vision of the organisation is, what the strategy is to achieve that vision, and how that's going to then be assessed and measured through the policing plan. When we get to that, then I would hope and think that automatically, as we start to prioritise that, it does come down to resources which are money in the end.
Yes.
And that'll give us, that'll start to automatically flow. At the first cut, that will be necessarily broad brush.
You may not be aware, but the Garda Síochána Act requires the authority once a year to give a view to the Minister in relation to your resources. And for 3 years now, we've had to say, actually, we don't know, because we haven't been able to get any sense of granularity, and I don't mean micro. So it's always been what we've tended to do is comment on structural issues and on problems that we observe with the estate and so on, and equipment, rather than giving an informed view of what resources you might need for the following year. So it would be good for us to have a shared ambition that when we have to write that letter next year, which is usually around August, that we might be in a position to actually have a better sense of your needs so that we can actually support you. But
yes,
up until now, while we've written always supportive letters, we've never been able to do it with numbers. We've tended to have to do it with concepts. And so just to share that with you, it's something that the authority has struggled with to fulfil its mandate there. And we've always done it because we want to be able to say we've considered your resources, and we've always sent, reasonable length of a letter, but we've always struggled to say this is what the 1.65 is giving us in terms of policing, and therefore if you want more of that, this is what you might need. So just to share that with you, that's kind of maybe an objective we might work towards for next August or September, to be in a better position. The authority will be in a better position to give the Minister advice in relation to the adequacy of your resources.
Yes, but what we're describing there is quite a difficult technical project as well, and maybe just to pick up a point that Patrick made earlier about the skills within the organisation. We would need additional skills to draw up the type of plan that you're talking about. One, that we understand what our demand is, and then two, how we're going to cost out the policing of that demand. So there certainly is an uptick needed around the professionals to assist us in that.
I think we recognise that, and I think that's probably what Moling was driving. So thank you for that. I mean, we're very keen to see that work advancing. Happy to wait, as we discussed upstairs, for the policing plan and the strategy and the vision, because it has to be done right. And so we're very comfortable with that. I'd like to move on now, if that's okay with you and with my colleagues, to the culture audit, which we had placed on the agenda. And again, this is about an exchange of views. This is not something that, that there is a black and white answer or an easy fix. So we're not looking for those kinds of answers, but we do want to have a conversation about where that might be going. So Pat is going to lead for us on that.
Thank you, Chair and Commissioner. Yeah, of course, it is an independent cultural audit, and it was something that the Policing Authority requested be carried out. So we got the report last May. So the first thing I'll say is the authority is very pleased with the rate of participation in the audit, in the survey. 40% of your members participated. That's 6,560. So we'd like to thank everyone who participated in the survey, because this wasn't a quick survey to fill up. So we do appreciate that. I do think it's timely with your arrival. While you're not obviously accountable for what's in the report, you obviously you will be accountable for changes to the culture going forward. I think we all know how important culture is. Culture, creates positive behaviour, and positive behaviour, of course, in turn generates better culture. People do the right thing, and it facilitates excellence in performance and success in reform. So it is incredibly important. In the limited amount of time I have, there are 3 areas we'll discuss: maybe the findings itself, and then very, very briefly, because we could spend all our time doing that, but your view then on what an appropriate culture should be within Garda Síochána, what culture you want to deliver, and then maybe some time on how you might deliver that culture. I know it's very early days, but it's probably something you would have given some initial thought to, and we do realise that it is probably one of the most difficult things that you have to do, one of the most difficult challenges. Before I go into maybe some detail on the report itself, I do take it that you accept the findings of the report. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Okay, we'll go on then maybe to the and highlight very, very quickly and then start some discussion. Well, the strengths, there are strengths, and I think strengths that you can be very, very proud of.
Yes.
Community engagement is a big commitment for everybody working in Garda Síochána. And then within your immediate teams, there are strengths in relationships, taking care of each other, friendships, and support to your colleagues. And there are also some high scores then in the code of ethics in relation to upholding the law and honesty and integrity. But then we go on to that's all the positives. But then there are a lot of weaknesses. For example, in the code of ethics, speaking up, transparency and communication, leadership, respect and equality get low scores. In the MRP, open to change, listening and empathy, equality get low scores. In the cultural reinforcers, performance management, reward and recognition, organisational design, learning and development get low scores. And then there's in the report included unwritten rules. It's befriend the right people, is what your people are saying. It's all about who you know. Promotion is based on who you know. Keep your head down, don't challenge, cover your back, and don't let your colleagues down. And then on the culture insight, small is beautiful. We are committed to our immediate teams, but don't hold senior leadership in as high regard. Silence means survival. Generally, we have the personal courage to speak up, but fear the consequences of doing so. And then we succeed despite our limitations. One rule for me, another rule for others, and it's all about who you know. So there are quite a lot of, I suppose, worrying feedback, if you like, from the survey. So I suppose there are strengths, and the report says that.
Yes.
There are strengths inherited in the current culture, but overall the report says it's not fit for purpose. So I suppose the first question I have for you is, were you disappointed or surprised on your arrival in reading the cultural audit?
Some of it is certainly disappointing. I think that individuals feel, well, they're not in a meritocracy, that you need to be in the know. That's disappointing and corrosive, but also then the inability to speak out and the lack of voice then that there is within the organisation, and in effect, whatever you say, just keep your head down, say nothing. So those are two things which are very unhealthy in an organisation. And also then there's a general comment that we're filling this in, but it'll make no difference because nothing's going to happen. And I think just addressing that first point initially, a lot has happened in terms of then engaging with our staff. Chief superintendents and superintendents have been asked to engage with their staff directly and to give us further feedback, and Sarah can talk about what those responses have been, and then where we go to next in terms of the next steps around the cultural and behavioural piece. But even just to assure our employees that we have noticed this and we're doing something about it. There's a uniform piece. I think my first or second week I changed the name from civilians to Garda staff because I wanted to engender a more inclusive culture, but also then to recognise increasingly Garda staff are going to be integral to delivering the policing service, and so there's no trying to break down the us and them silo that is reported within the survey as well. Also then, I point down to the Code of Ethics and the importance of the Code of Ethics in terms of its impact on the behaviours and then the culture within the organisation. I can entirely expect and demand certain behaviours of those who work within the organisation. I can entirely demand and expect how they will work within our processes and the business processes, and therefore how well and effect they do their job. And culture then is built up in my mind from just 1,000 day-to-day interactions and small things that happen in the organisation, just how things are done around here. And I think we can offer big signals about that, and I'd point to the promotions, the sergeant's promotions, but also then we've explored and will come forward with a new process which will have an objective front end to it in terms of analysis and examination of those who put themselves forward for what in effect are first line and second line supervisory positions. So there's lots of practical things we can do. The cultural piece is hard to move. It requires a couple of things, which is one around the leadership within the organisation, that people engage, our managers engage with their staff. They demand of them, but they also stretch their staff. That is an organisation, we're seen as an organisation which cares, but cares in a professional sense in terms of developing our staff as well, but also then that people can have voice within the organisation in that they can make suggestions, they can raise issues, and those are seen, and that is seen as being a positive culture. If I just add one thing, the particular characteristic of policing is that it's easy to see this as a transactional piece of business, and sometimes it does have to be quite transactional in terms of command and control, and this is what's required of you and this is what we will do. But it's by its great majority, it's a far more sort of human interaction, and that requires a more transformational view and transformational approach within the organisation. And particularly if we want to remain an employer's choice, we have to realise people will only work in an organisation where they feel they'll be valued, where they'll feel they'll be stretched, and where they'll feel properly rewarded for their efforts. And so we must promote the idea of a meritocracy where people are recognised and thanked for their efforts and are appropriately rewarded as well.
Thanks, Commissioner, and we do note some of the initiatives. Maybe just, and we will go back to that.
Yes.
Are you going to, I suppose, and you have done so, I think partially there, I know at least, articulate the vision that you have in your mind right now? I know you probably haven't finished your consultation or your people talking to their people, but if somebody was to ask you, I don't know, in a month's time, what type of culture do you want in Garda Síochána? How close are you to, or have you done already, forming what that view is, and perhaps articulating that view or writing it down? Okay, everybody is quite clear about what the culture you want.
Well, I've covered off some of the number of elements in that, I think it's important that people see that it's an organisation that acts with integrity, that there's procedural fairness, and so that speaks to the promotion processes or getting into specialisms and how people are treated and how they are treated individually, but also then the values at which we would espouse in terms of dealing with the public, in terms of the service that we would provide through and set out the behaviours and the culture of ethics, that would actually exist within the organisation as well in terms of individual dealings. An organisation where there is visible leadership, where people lead by example and behaviours are demonstrated and exemplified by managers and by indeed by the senior leadership of the organisation as well. And we sitting at this table must be absolute exemplars of the behaviours that we expect throughout the organisation, for instance, and I will demand that of all my senior staff, because that then has a ripple effect down into the organisation, and our behaviours drive a lot of the culture then within the organisation. talked about voice. I think it's important. Every employee knows what they're doing, knows that it's valued, and knows that their contribution is important, and that they themselves, if they have a view on what they're doing, that they can make a further suggestion, and that'll be received as well. But also then they're in an organisation where they're engaged and where they're stretched and developed, and not only are they properly rewarded, but they can see that they have a career path, and it's one of personal career development.
And you did touch on the code of ethics, and maybe we'll talk about one or two things in that. Speaking up, I think comes across very clearly that is an area that that members of an Garda Síochána are perhaps uncomfortable with. And I suppose I presume it's about trying to create a safe environment where people feel that they can speak up. So have you any thoughts around that? And I suppose it starts with your own team. I presume, obviously, I can see that probably is there. People can challenge you. But getting that right throughout the organisation, where people feel it's safe to speak up.
Well, that goes to the piece around the transformational leadership within the organisation. That if somebody speaks up, it's not seen as a threat, but it's dealt with appropriately. And I would encourage all of our staff and members, if there is an issue, they should speak up. I'm absolutely for that, because that creates a positive environment within the organisation, and it's essential in terms of the feedback loop that we have within the organisation. But I think the most important relationship is between the individual and their next supervisor, and that's the relationship which is really crucial. And I think that's the one that makes an impact on people's day-to-day work experience. And so there is a piece about leadership development and the behaviours and attributes that we expect of those who seek and attain leadership positions in the organisation.
Okay, Commissioner, thank you. And I acknowledge your mention of the Code of Ethics in your report, and very, very welcome that, and indeed the great work of Assistant Commissioner Pat Lee and Superintendent Myler. Where we're not there, we're in a situation where we have over 10,000 of the total number signed up. When I say signed up, I've got face-to-face training, and there is a commitment now that will be done by the end of the year. And
that's correct.
That's really, really important.
Yes.
The other part of that, though, which we're very disappointed in, is that the signing up. That means signing a commitment that I will abide by the code. We are not where we should be in that. Slightly over 50% have signed that declaration of the people who have received the face-to-face training. Yeah. Now, we are very concerned about that in the policing authority. We've engaged with your people on that. Yeah. We've got commitments that's going to be a big focus, and we've asked you as well. Yeah. And the implications for people not signing up are quite serious, especially for people who want to go for promotion. And there's now a commitment that people will not be considered for promotion if they don't sign up to the Code of Ethics. And nor will they be considered for other selection competitions. So that is serious. But I suppose maybe to put it to you, what does it say of the culture within the organisation if close to 50% of people who have received training are reluctant to sign and make that promise to the general public that I will abide by the Code of Ethics?
Well, or make a final sort of judgment on that, I think I would like the space to work more at this. In our very first conversation, you emphasised the importance of the Code of Ethics, the training, but also that people signify that they received the training, they understood it, and they're going to commit to it by signing it. And I totally sign up to that. We have further engagement that we want to do with the staff associations, but then we want to have further engagement then directly with the staff through their line managers as well. Now, it is a fact that if you seek promotion or you seek to attain a specialism, that you'll need to have signed up to the Code of Ethics. And that's because it sets out the behaviours that we expect within the organisation. And these are entirely in keeping with what we want to be, human rights focused and ethical behaviour within and without the with the organisation. So we're entirely behind that, but there's more work to do. And it's almost, I think, we're coming down now to a case of individual conversations. And I may sort of quote myself from earlier, I don't want to be just entirely transactional about this. There is a piece about engaging in the conversation and engaging in some transformational skills around persuading people. One of the importance of this, and secondly, why it's important also that they sign up to it. And by and large, there's a big public confidence piece in this, that people within the organisation have fully accepted what the Code of Ethics says and are committed to it, and have committed to it through signing it.
Thank you for that answer, Commissioner. And maybe I think I have a few more minutes, have I? A few more minutes. It's all about who you know, and you did mention about more objective assessment for...
Oh yes, into the promotion processes. Yeah. So it will require a change of regulations. It has been examined by colleagues in the HR, but there will be an element which will be objective psychometric assessment, and this is well tested in terms of assessing individuals for first, second line management type positions, and we can use that then as a filter rather than the regional boards and then central boards process.
What do you think is your biggest challenge in instilling your vision of a culture that is, appropriate for a police force that you want to have one of the best in the world? What is the biggest challenge for you?
I think actually communication. I think communication, because it's fine that I can issue as many diktats as I want, but actually we need to have a conversation within the organisation. It's also then that all the senior managers, indeed those managing the organisation, are also following through. And culture doesn't change by announcements or grand plans or grand pronouncements from me. It is a day-to-day, individually, how people experience their workplace, and it's how we change that. And that all comes down to communication of what we expect from individuals, what we expect from our leaders, and how that's followed through on, and people actually see that those behaviours become alive in the organisation and are the constant behaviours.
I agree with you on communication. Not alone is the time it takes. It's hugely time consuming, of course.
Well, it's even the thought that you have communicated and may have entirely missed the target altogether.
Could I just ask you a final question? So you're going to be 5 years in the job.
Yes.
I think it is possible, I don't know, do you think it's possible for you to instill an appropriate and really good culture within Garda and Síochána within that period? And assuming the answer is yes, when would you like to measure progress being made? In other words, when would you have the survey?
Well, yes, I think it can be done in 5 years, most definitely. In lots of ways, that's why I took the job. I've taken the job to make a difference and to do my very best to make sure that we as an organisation and Garda Síochána protect this society. And if that requires then positive behaviours, cultural change within the organisation to do that better, and I think it does, then that's what will happen. And some of these things you can achieve quite quickly as well. If there's signal events, signal things that we can do, and we've already sort of started. We've identified them and touched upon them. It's now just following through, so people can see the changes that say to a promotion process. They're here to stay, and that's what the promotion process is going to be, to promote the idea of a meritocracy within the organisation. All those things are important.
Thank you, Commissioner, and thank you for all the assurances you've given us and for expressing or articulating your ambition for the organisation. Thank you very much. And I wish you luck in it.
Thank you.
The challenge. Yeah.
Thank you.
I have to chastise Pat Costello for using the word force. We banned that 2.5 years ago. It's policing service. See, just so you know, I'm equally difficult to this side of the table. Commissioner, it's an opportunity for me just to say a couple of things for your information. First of all, I really welcome the emphasis on behaviours. I think sometimes people may have a sense that this is a mechanical process for the authority. There's a code of ethics and everybody has to sign and that's the end of it, because it isn't. So I like the emphasis on behaviours. 3 things that I just want to make you aware of. One is that the authority was very mindful that this audit arrived without a sort of a broader context. So we've commissioned a small piece of research to give us some comparative sense of policing cultures into which we can place those findings. And obviously we'll share that with you when it's completed, because it's important because there are, and I know from some work I've done myself, there are trends here that are not dissimilar to other policing services. Secondly, the authority, you mentioned about the importance of people being valued and feeling valued, and it's again a cue for me to let you know that the authority has begun a piece of work in informing itself in relation to the reserve service that you have, and there are issues about those officers being valued that are coming to our attention, but we're not finished yet, so we'll be talking to you about it in due course. The reserve strategy was one of the pieces that we had to identify as not completed when we did a review of MRP actions last year, and so we're keen to keep in touch with that piece of work. And finally, you mentioned the regulation change for promotion, and again, this is something you may not be aware of, but regulation change, the department will consult us. So if you'd like to share your thoughts with us, again,
Yes.
there's a better chance of us being supportive or not, depending on if we know more.
Yeah.
We've found ourselves from time to time being consulted on regulations and scratching our heads and saying, what's it about? And then that wastes time. So if you're engaged with the department in changing regs, be aware they will come to us for review, so you can help yourselves if you fill us in first.
Absolutely, and in respect of the reserve strategy, so we have a senior leadership team on the 10th of October. John's is placing that on the agenda then.
Great.
And also then, in respect of the promotions, if not the 10th of October, then later in the month, and then we'll have a position paper with you as well about what the new promotion process for Sergeant Inspector should be.
We look forward to that. Thank you. I'd like to move on now to a topic that's been a recurring theme, and I know your colleagues are aware of, to do with driver training, and Noel Brett is going to lead for us on it. Noel?
Thank you, Chair. Commissioner, thank you, and good to see you and your team at your first public meeting, and I wish you and your team every success. The issue of driver training in Garda Síochána was first raised by the Inspectorate, Garda Síochána Inspectorate, back in 2008. It was covered again in the 2015 Inspectorate report, Changing Policing in Ireland. And I guess the frustration we have here is the lack of progress in putting in place an appropriate driver training regime across Garda Síochána. The last time I asked this question over a year ago, I was told there were 2,600 members of Garda Síochána driving on Chief's orders, Chief's permission, should I say, across the country. What I'd like to know, if possible, is how many Garda are today driving on Chief's permissions across the country with no training? And secondly, what numbers of Garda do you actually need to train immediately and over the next 5 years in each of the 5 levels, CBD 1 to 5? And to my mind, CBD 1 is basic, courteous, safe driving. It's not blue lights, it's not sirens. And I firmly believe that should take place in Templemore. I understand that CBD 2 and higher, which does involve blue lights and sirens, you may have differing views as to how you want to do that. So really just to try and answer those questions for me, and then if you could set out specifically what you're now going to do to recover this situation, having already run an unsuccessful tender, request for information, what your plans are now and what the key timelines are for the delivery of that.
Okay. Well, can I pass to David, and he can take some of the detail, and then I think I might lift a point about CB1 and CB2 when that training should happen.
Thanks, Commissioner. David. Hi.
I'll take it in stages for you. At the moment, there's 481 vacancies that we see that where has a critical requirement for CBD2 training. The current ability within the college at the moment is an output of 540 per annum. They've given an undertaking that will be a priority, and by the end of 2019 that cohort will be completed. That's unfortunately only part of the story, because on the other side of the scale, the figures that you mentioned already is that there's 2,127 people who are currently driving on CBD1. The idea of people driving on Chief's authorisation is all but gone. I'd say the number of people driving on Chief's authorisation are in less than 100 at this point in time. And that came out of the audit that was done by the State Claims Agency in respect of that. So we've certainly I've taken that on board in the context of some consultations I've taken on board in respect of it. Some of the difficulties that we have encouraged, or that I've encountered in respect of trying to implement a change process, is that there's a requirement under the Act that for a person to be able to break the lights or break speed limits is governed by an Act, and to try and either bring back people who are recently retired from the training school or to hire civilian drivers in the organisation, it is going to require change of legislation in respect of that. That's on the legal advice I've received in respect of that. On the other side of it, I have had in-depth consultation with the Road Safety Authority. The Road Safety Authority and ourselves signed up to an ESDS programme back in 2014. There's differences in approaches to the ESD programme versus the CBD 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 programme, and that needs a revision to try and align the two of those, because the ESD programme is part of the government's road safety strategy of 2016 to 21. So we have to try and go back and look at that in the context of that. The other part of that is the Road Safety Authority, and consultations we had with them in respect of getting advanced drivers instructors from the Road Safety Authority, that there's only 12 of those in the country. So while the Road Safety Authority are prepared to come on board with us in respect of the direction I want to go with it, they're not equipped at the moment to be able to provide that level of expertise with us. You mentioned in respect of the RFI that was recently sent out. I think the one big difficulty in respect of when we went out to the market looking for information in respect of the matter, we were curtailed in what we could ask by virtue of the legislation that was there. And that prohibited us from asking certain questions about people being able to drive over the speed limit in certain circumstances. So that hindered our ability, but notwithstanding that, I've gone out and I've spoken to a number of external providers at the moment, and two of them are due back to me in early October in the context of what they can deliver in respect of driver training. The State Claims Agency as well, we have been in contact with them, and one of the reasons why they took on board their research some years ago was by virtue of the number of driving accidents that were incurring as a result of Garda cars being involved in them. And in response to their research, that's part of one of the things that we did do was try and eliminate Chief's authorisation, so that we had some sort of level of standard to be obtained. The one thing I will say, it is a complex issue. We have to balance the standards of driving that's required for response driving versus the responsibility for the communities and the people that are actually driving the cars, and particularly the guards themselves. But one thing that I am looking at very strongly is that in respect of CBD 1, I think that can be totally outsourced. I don't think there's a need for us to do it, but obviously it will have to be costed. In respect of CBD 2, 3 and 4 and 5, I think there's, as I said, there's a revision that could be done in respect of that. If I take CBD 1 alone, there was 300 days lost to training in 2016 in respect of that alone. So if I was to get rid of that, that would free up 300 days automatically. Likewise, in respect of driving courses such as HGVs, four-wheel drive, personnel carriers and towing of vehicles, I have calculated there's probably 227 days lost in a year as well in respect of those. So if I can outsource 2 of those alone, it will probably save me in the bones of maybe 500 days training that could be more equipped to dealing with the CBD2, what you're looking for in the context of that. Other than that, that's about where we are, Noel, in respect of it. There's no doubt there's a piece of work to be done. It has proven, I've only taken up in February, but it has proven to be challenging to move the thing on. But there is a discourse that has been had in respect of it with a view to try and moving that forward. and I don't expect to come back to the authority here again as we go forward with an excuse that we can't move the thing forward. It has to move forward. It's a no-brainer.
Dave, look, I'd compliment you particularly on bringing an end to the Chief's permissions. I think that is extremely significant in the protection of your own members going about their daily duty, but also in terms of other members of the public who share the road with them. So congratulations and compliments for doing that. Commissioner, we've had 5 different assistant commissioners over the last 3 years come in, talk to us about this topic. The inspectorate first raised it in 2008, again in 2015. So I'm very pleased to hear Assistant Commissioner Sheehan outlining what he's proposing to do there. What I would like to be really clear about, particularly is CBD1, there is absolutely no reason in my mind why that cannot be entirely outsourced as you're outlining. There are 2,500 regulated, approved driving instructors in the country, and to my mind this is something that should be delivered regionally, not centralised, so that people can do it as part of their day's work and do that really quickly. So I look forward to the outcome of your discussions on CBD1 and getting that in place very, very quickly. In terms of operationally, if there are still, as you said, 2,127 driving around on daily duty with CBD1, if I'm correct, that means they cannot use their blue lights, they cannot use their sirens. And I guess I'm thinking back to the anecdote and only what I read in the media. For example, in the Regency shooting, I think I remember reading that the first response car to that couldn't use its blue lights or sirens. And we hear these cases coming up again and again and again. And I really do impress upon you, Commissioner, the need to once and for all get this in place and figure out what it is you wish to do with recruits coming into Templemore, whether the expectation is that people procure this course themselves in the private sector before they come near you as recruits, because this is basic, competent, courteous driving. It's not police driving. It's a basic minimum. And I would be grateful if you could keep us updated through the committee in terms of the next steps. And just finally, if you could say a little bit about your plans about another tender. It mentions in the document a tender. And I would also ask that you keep civilianisation very much to the fore in this. The notion that 50 guards would be assigned to this work doesn't sit well in the context of civilianisation. And I understand you will need a change to the legislation, and I think as an authority we'd be supportive of that.
Well, if I may, in respect to that, there's 2 things I want to just comment in respect to that. The first thing is that my intention will be to align ourselves very much in line with a lot of other police forces who have a ratio of 1 in 3 to driver training. I think that there's a misnomer in the context of the type of training that's provided at CBD2 and CBD1. CBD1 basically is little more than being able to drive a car properly with a driving licence. CBD2 goes into tradecraft in respect of how you actually respond driving. It is a totally different type of driving. I'm not an advocate, and I don't think it should be taken as a right that every person that goes into Templemore should come out with CBD2. I think that they have enough pressures on them at a very influential time of their training to get that level of training without the necessity of having to try pass a driving course as well, which may or may not influence their progression within their training. But certainly I think that the ambit of trying to do that within the period of their probation is something that we could look at in the context of that. But first and foremost, I've got to get over the 2127 people first before we do that.
Look, I'd absolutely defer to your professional call in terms of when is the right time to teach a member of the police service CBD2. I mean, that's absolutely your competence and your call. I look forward to watching the update and hearing of it. You might just say a bit about your plans for a tender and how that's going to be done regionally.
I really haven't fleshed it out, no, to that extent, but what I am looking at, I cannot see any reason why the likes of CBD1, if we are going to outsource it, it can't be done regionally. I think that's a given. I've had in-depth discussions with the RSA in a number of meetings that we had to try and flesh out that whole idea, and they're very much in favour of supporting us and working with us in the context of trying to deliver that. What I will have to do in the context of that is both costed and the procurement element of it as well, which is going to take a bit of time. But I think that the trust of a plan is there, but we haven't really fleshed it out to the extent that I would like it to be.
Look, at compliments for what you've achieved to date, and good luck with the rest of it. And Commissioner, I would ask that you personally endorse and support and oversee what is an urgent risk.
Well, no, absolutely, and I'm very much aware that the authority is seized of this matter. In some ways, it's just a simple capacity issue, so we have to look to a dual economy, mixed economy here in terms of both private providers, but also then what our workforce mix is as well in providing this training. But this is well-trodden path. Other services have achieved this, and we'll follow through. And I would echo David's comments in respect of when people should, in particular, receive the CBT2 training. Like I think that's, a year, 2 years in.
Absolutely, and I think in what you've said, both of you said today, I think there's a very strong message now to the regulated driving instruction industry to gear up for your tender. Yeah. And I would be very confident that across the country, if the tender is written properly and structured properly, that you should be able to stimulate a market.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Anybody want to clarify anything? I have one or two questions for Dave. Don't worry, I won't expect you to know the answer, Commissioner. Anybody else? Two things. I'm not asking you to, you might take this one away. We were advised by the Road Safety Authority that there is a market for CBD2 available in the private sector, so you might look into that. I'm just saying that's what they told us. And for the benefit of the audience, CBD stands for competency-based driving. Secondly, I was interested in your comment about legislation and connecting with the fact that you need legislation to get civilian drivers. Did I understand that correctly? And whose act is that?
It's provided under I have it handy. I lost it.
I'm a bit out there. If you're going to train people under blue light conditions, they have to be a serving member of an emergency service, and they have to be supervised by a serving member of the emergency service. So the problem is the fire service have this, the ambulance service. You can't use lay people to train cars driven under blue light conditions. It is a regulation and it can be changed, and I think it's part of the package.
So it's a regulation. That's easier.
It's part of the Act, is Section 87(1)(b) of the Road Traffic Act of 2010. It also covers, in respect of the FCPN notices as well, whereby members may be detected in excess of the speed limit. But the DPP has given us advices in respect to the matter as to how and the circumstances when that can be, we can actually cancel those tickets. It is fairly stringent in respect to that. To allow,
I was thinking more of it in terms of the training side, the education side. It seems
the training side where it comes in, where the advice that we have received is that if we want to have Garda drive or civilian people coming in to help us with Garda driving, they'd have to be referred to as Garda staff, and I think the Commissioner has dealt with that episode very easily. The second part of it then is that if there was a change in legislation in that respect, it will allow them to exceed the speed limit in the course of the driving training that they have to do for the purpose of the tradecraft that's required.
Okay, because it does. I mean, and I think we all share this view. It doesn't make sense. The quantity, the numbers of sworn Garda members that you would require to deal with this backlog. Just doesn't. It's not an effective use of resources.
No, it's not. And this is just, this is a capacity. This is a training capacity issue. And how do we get extra capacity? And how can we be creative around that? Yeah. And David's got a number of irons in the fire around achieving that. But in some ways, he's also trying to fill a leaking bucket because people keep on moving on to other jobs.
That's really the issue. And we, as Noel has done, we encourage you to see if you can stop the bucket filling.
Well, I think one part of the bucket filling was caused last year with the creation of the ASUs in the DMR, and that literally halted training for a considerable period of time to allow those people to be trained to a higher standard. And that is the type of difficulties we face from time to time. But we have to get round it, and it's because of these other courses that the guys in the college are dealing with that has taken up some of the time to deal with the more fundamental things for the frontline policing.
Now, I take your point as well about possibly finding some other way of doing the HGV and so on, which doesn't seem to be caught by that piece of legislation.
Chair, sorry, just if I might clarify as well, I mean, I'd urge you to think outside the box. There are other police services that have got the right mix of attested officers and civilians, outsourcing, and certain of this stuff definitely does have to be done in-house, and that's understood. But maybe to urge you in your thinking to be creative, to look at the use of off-road facilities. I mean, there are facilities, for example, in County Monaghan, where there are skid pans, all kinds of facilities where people can go and learn, and also to think about like in the marine and the aviation industry, the use of simulators and other modern technology which maybe can allow people to achieve some experiential training much faster and from different locations. So maybe to ask you to think, to be not just to replicate the traditional models, to be as creative as you can, and you know, we understand the size of the problem, but to get going.
Absolutely. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Noel. Commissioner, the next item on our agenda is the Commissioner's monthly report, and as we did in private session, I would also encourage you to make this your own. We've had a formula, but we're not wedded to it. There are certain things the authority likes to see in it, but we're happy to engage with you as you as you develop your own thinking as to what type of a report you'd like to provide us with. But I know my colleagues have some questions on the existing one, so maybe Valerie's going to start.
Yeah, I was actually going to go into a particular area, but maybe to open by first of all acknowledging thank you for the report, and by the way, welcome on board, Commissioner, and it's lovely to meet you, and good to meet you all in the team, and with my colleagues, wish you all the very best in the years ahead. I'm not actually going to drill in particularly into elements of the report, because what I'd like to do really is draw on a number of things you've mentioned already. You've mentioned a number of times the importance of the people in the organisation and the development of people, and of their recognition and their feeling of value in the organisation. And we touched on that in talking to Pat. And I think maybe it's time to draw some of these threads together. We've been speaking with your colleagues for quite some time now. We've been talking about the question of the fact that there isn't an all-embracing HR strategy in the organisation. And I think some of us find it surprising that there isn't just a document that pulls together all the strands that we do here through MRP, through the policing plan. Everything that happens in your organisation is about the people, and probably more than any other organisation of your size, your service is your people, really. And even though we mentioned earlier equipment, etc., I think in large measure it's the actual person is the service. So that's really the context. We've been informed that a strategy is in the making and almost ready, and it's probably on your desk, so I'm not going to ask you about it. It's really to talk in the round, and maybe to just come up to speed so we share an understanding maybe of what our expectations are in this regard. So I think, and maybe just by way of introduction, and then I'll hand over to yourself. I suppose what I would see broadly a HR strategy is the broad directive piece that should be absolutely in line with your policing strategy, and out of that should fall HR plans that are absolutely in line with your policing plans. And we know it is all there, except to be drawn together. I would expect such a document to include a number of areas, and I'll list them off, and you may want to comment on some of them. Workforce planning would be the basis, and you've touched on that. Obviously, identifying the demand in pure numeric terms, in terms of the service. But then on the whole qualitative side, your approach to recruitment, to diversity in terms of the team to reflect the communities you serve, career development, which you've mentioned there earlier, career pathing, specialism and management development. We're interested in deployment in the broadest sense, including role definition, the roles of Garda members, Garda staff and reserves, and what they do and how they work together as a team and how they complement each other, and how you look at deployment there in the future. Rostering and the use of overtime, and overtime is a topical issue. Where does the roster come into play in that, in terms of our understanding of complexities of pay agreements that require overtime? So, what's happening there. Training, learning and development you've touched on. Performance management we've discussed a lot as well. Reward, again, I think most prominently in the sense of the value that people feel is placed on their participation. Obviously, not all of remuneration, etc., is within your direct control. Having said that, it's not beyond you to know what it is you want to achieve. And I think, as Noel said, in this space too, thinking outside the box is possible. Just because impediments may be there, it doesn't mean the agenda cannot be opened, particularly in a time of challenge and change. Obviously, can't be very costly, but I think the authority would look for new and innovative solutions. Dignity, grievance, and I suppose the flip side of that, discipline. Employee well-being, including wellness, safety, occupational health, family-friendly initiatives, and also, I suppose, underpinning all of that, the processes and systems that inform the success of all of the above. What information do you have? How do you track all of these pieces? And really, it's not for the authority we want this. We'd like to see it, to know that all of the thousands of people in your organisation have a sense that the organisation has a plan for their career, but also then that we know as an organisation you really are making the best of the talent that you have. So we know it's all there because we get pieces in the different plans, but we would like to see it pulled together. And I think just before I hand over to you, Commissioner, I appreciate that you're going to be into a new strategic planning process and with operational plans associated, and the HR strategy will have to be in tandem with that. But it might be no harm to even start with an as-is strategy that isn't setting out everything in the future, but just says under all of these pieces of the jigsaw, this is our strategy at the moment. We may want to change it, but this is as it is, and then work on how we want to move forward. So really, I'd like to just hear your observations on that today, Commissioner. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think the one thing I would highlight, just to put it in front of all of that, is actually what the organisational structure is going to be. So what is our operating model? And I've mentioned earlier just what I think the operating model may look like, and how demand on our policing service will and what's required of us may change over the next 3 to 5 years. So then that will drive things like, where do we want people, what type of skills we're bringing into the organisation, where we think they're going to be deployed, with what training and what expertise. And if I point towards the rise of cybercrime, crimes against the vulnerable, but also then local accountability, local autonomy, you can see how this will start to come together. Now, a lot of what you've have listed off here was a very useful checklist against the draft I have on my desk. But beyond that, there's a lot of this that we can action now, because the workforce plan, it will be dictated by how we think what the operating model of the organisation is going to be. But beyond that, things like performance management, coupled to then, I know it's referred to as discipline, but I think actually there's a piece that needs done, and the Commission has picked it up, but I've also picked it up, that our discipline processes are quite old, and not really in keeping with an organisation which seeks to be an employer of choice, centred on its people, transformational. There has to be an element in there of actually not blame, but thinking, did you do this well? Where's the improvement? So, more like a retailer than the military. And actually, I don't even think the military's in this place now. So there is a part about our regulation and how we deal with poor performance, as opposed to a matter now called discipline, but I would suggest is described by misconduct, or indeed gross misconduct, and being very clear about our behaviour, the behaviours we expect of people, and what cannot be tolerated and fits into that gross misconduct type space, as opposed to behaviours which are around an individual needing some further training, development, mentoring, or whatever it might be. But even beyond that, they may never actually reach a position of competence, and you have to have a method then of dealing with that as well. So, I have picked up, I've written down carefully actually all you've said there. So it's a considerable list.
I suppose the point I'm making, and it is a considerable list when you look at it, but actually we've heard about initiatives in all of these areas.
Yeah.
We've heard about thoughts and aspirations in all of these areas, but we hear them in different contexts.
Okay.
And I'm not convinced that the thoughts are joined up.
All right. Okay.
And in particular, then we have clashing, competing priorities, and that's most exemplified, I think, in the demand on training and training capacity. And it's really, how does it all link together? And I think at the last meeting, before your own arrival, we were tossing around the question of, the recruitment, the accelerated recruitment of Recruit Garda. Is there a moment when you pause and you say, actually, do we get more value, and particularly with the cost pressures you have for the organisation, in looking at the redeployment and the skill mix, the Garda member, Garda staff skill mix piece, and look at the training piece and get better value out of the expenditure? And so it's looking at the picture in the round, I think, is what we'd like to see in the future.
No, absolutely, and I know entirely the point you make. It to engage in a big recruitment exercise of Garda members is expensive, because they've such, they have to be equipped and then they have to be trained over such a long period of time, whereas
and the
Garda staff
cost of
who can,
not
it's hugely expensive, but a Garda staff who can be probably recruited in a shorter space of time and inducted into the organisation in less time as well, can displace, in effect, a ready trained Garda member out into operational duty. So there is a validity in, absolutely in what you're saying.
There's a very rich agenda there, and I think the authority will be very open to hearing both concrete plans in terms of immediate policing plans, but also your vision for the future and how that vision gets translated into operating plans over coming years. Because, I would repeat again, the ideas are in the room. The ideas are in your organisation.
Yes.
The thinking is there. I think what we're looking for from you, commissioners, is to hook it all together.
But implementation, yes, absolutely.
Okay. I'll leave it at that, Chair. Thank you.
I know Maureen has a question, and then Noel, and then some colleagues here. So, Maureen.
Commissioner, you're simply getting going to hear a rant, or maybe I won't call it a rant, but an issue that has arisen repeatedly through the course of the year, and so I might as well make you share the experience too. But it's the issue of diversifying the Garda ranks, and it's been given a very high profile by government, indeed by the authority, and we struggle with it not moving forward with any kind of pace each time we meet. That it includes civilianization, and by that I mean not just civilians coming in, but redeployment of existing sworn officers. The target originally for the year was 500. A revised target was set by yourselves of 250. We're now at 126 at the end of September, and that has changed very little since the last time we met in the summertime. The other is the recruitment of reserves, which is below target. Recruitment based on diversity, which is not meeting its targets. Indeed, the only significant recruitment target that is being met is the recruitment of new sworn Gardaí. So one could be forgiven for thinking that there may be a problem here. There may be an issue if there's progress meeting the target on one side, but whenever it is about a diversity factor, they're not. And I suppose what I'm saying is, I don't want to be banging on about this. What I'm saying is, I think what we need to see, and what you need, is pace to this, and a ratcheting up of achieving this. And you'll have to do your own assessment of why you are where you are with it, but the pace is simply not satisfactory and not acceptable. And I don't know which, I'm not asking you to respond, Commissioner, but I think I can say it is for the authority a very significant issue.
Well, if I may respond, and I hope you can have some confidence in the fact that we've, no later than yesterday, but even in my first 4 weeks here, we have talked about this a lot, in particular the target of 250 and how we're going to achieve that. I've been assured in respect of that 250 that will be provided, or that will be in place by the end of the year, and then subsequent to that, now our processes are up and running, that will accelerate into next year then going forward. I am very conscious that the Garda staff that we recruit are releasing people who have precious experience out into frontline duties of whatever sort, and it seems, you know, a very sensible and very advantageous route for me to go. And now on the point of diversity, I think maybe like other police services, we do suffer a little from being a bit of a mystery to the young person looking into this organisation and thinking, well, what is that career about? And so there is a duty on us around outreach, around how we explain what a career in Garda Síochána, both as a staff or a member, entails. So what the rewards are, what's the career advancement, what do the duties look like, and for many they have an understanding of that because a family member or a friend or a friend's father or whatever it might be is in Garda Síochána, and so they get an understanding of that. But for a lot of young people, they look into the organisation and we are a mystery to them, and they're not attracted to it. And so there is a piece about us selling this as a career, and it is an honourable career, it's an honourable profession, but also with many benefits in terms as being an employee in what is a positive, moving ahead organisation. And so that's a challenge for us, and it's a challenge for it's a challenge for other police services as well. But at least then some of the paths by which we break that down are understood.
Thank you.
Noel?
Thanks, Chair. Commissioner, I'm focusing on your report. Thank you for it, and I'm focusing in particular on Section 7, Internal Affairs. As of today, there are 34 members of your staff who are suspended from duty. 11 of those are new suspensions that took place so far in 2018, and you've reinstated 3 members of staff in 2018. What of the other 23, and how long have they been suspended for, and what's the plan to bring those cases to conclusion, and what's the longest, the average amount of time somebody might be suspended from duty, and why it takes so long to conclude them? I don't expect you to tell.
Well, I'll look to David here again.
I don't actually have the exact figures, no, but I'm familiar with it because I would have presided over the extension of most of those people at the 1st of August. The biggest problem that we have in respect to that is the myriad of judicial reviews which have been taken legal process, and until we get out of that legal process, we're unable to do it. Some of the other suspensions are people who have been suspended who are currently before the courts, and that's dealt with under legislation and under regulations in respect to how that process actually operates. And those people are currently being processed in respect to that matter, and those suspensions are reviewed on a quarterly basis based on the information that's available to me at the time.
Fine, thanks, Dave. That's easy to understand. Now, today, as of today, you've so far in 2018, you've opened 1,205 new complaints and potential breaches of discipline files against members of your staff. How do you as an organisation ensure the consistency of disciplinary findings and the appropriateness of sanctions across the organisation, across different divisions, across different districts? How do you ensure that there's a consistency in the sanctions and the appropriateness of them?
Can I look to David?
Yeah, the difficulty I have in respect to that is that the authority has been delegated down to chief superintendents and has been delegated down by the commissioner in respect to that. Achieving that level of consistency can be difficult because it depends on there's a number of factors, both aggravating factors and other factors that may have to be taken into consideration when the decision-making process has been dealt with. No later than yesterday, I issued a guidance document of a matrix type fare for the purpose of trying to bring about that level of consistency that you're talking about. But ultimately, the decision making in respect to that matter is with the person that's been identified as either being the deciding officer or else the appointing officer, and those are the people having. So really, the consistency that you're looking for, where one thing might be dealt differently in another place, can be difficult to tie down by virtue of a lot of circumstances that are involved in the process at that point.
And I guess I'd be interested in consistency across ranks as well, that this is about discipline, not just for attested officers. I know there's a different set of procedures, but also for Garda staff, but of people of different rank as well. So if you've had 1,205 so far, new files opened in terms of potential breaches of discipline and complaints this year, what of the cases opened in the last 5 years? How many of those are not concluded? How many are still open? How long does it take on average to close a discipline file? And could it be the situation that there are still files open 5, 6, 7 years later?
It could be. I'm aware of a number of files that are open that length, but again, I would have to say that those particular files are subject to court injunctions, so therefore we're prohibited from progressing those files until the termination of court proceedings. That is the biggest problem we have in respect to those that are open of longevity. The remaining elements of it have been reduced. We're trying to reduce it. We have certain plans in place. And one thing that we brought about last year in conjunction with our colleagues in the Garda Síochána Ombudsman Commission is to bring about local intervention, whereby lower service level complaints are dealt with at a local level. We have tried it in the city centre in Pearse Street. It has been working very well, and now we're proposing to extend it with effect almost from the 1st of October. We're extending to the southeast region. That has taken a significant number of complaints out of the system, but it's done entirely as a methodology between ourselves and GSOC, and it's proven very effective.
Justice Charlton, in his summing up on an earlier module of the Disclosure Tribunal, I think he had a very stark message for the leadership team in Garda Síochána in terms of the way in which you deal with members of staff who either can't or won't attend and perform their duties to the appropriate standard. I'd be interested, Commissioner, as an incoming Commissioner, what your early assessment is in terms of the fitness for purpose of your disciplinary procedures and your competence procedures. And you alluded to that a little bit earlier on, and just what your thoughts are on this area.
Well, I think that they are ripe and overripe now for reform. I think we should be clear about what is actually poor performance and how we deal with that. And I would say within those 1,200 cases, there are many cases which aren't a discipline issue, but they're an issue of poor performance. And what we want to deal with those properly, but the way you deal with those is through management action and maybe a support for the officer, additional training, whatever it might be. But there can be your failure in terms of your performance failure may be so catastrophic that you can no longer stay in the organisation. That's not poor performance is not a soft touch either. But the second part of that is misconduct and indeed gross misconduct. So that is where the case where there's clear dishonesty or malfeasance or excessive use of force, whatever it might be, and those cases should be dealt with quickly and in fact fast tracked. So we're dealing with that really bad behaviour, which has no place in the organisation, quickly and effectively. And our systems, our process at the moment is nowhere near that. And the Commission referred to it, and it's very striking for me when David has briefed me on the various problems that he has in respect of the discipline regulations at the moment. They are very difficult to navigate through. They are ripe for judicial challenge, and these challenges are very expensive, not only just to us, but in drawing things out. And I think it engenders extra stress on the members engaged as well, because they don't get a quick resolution. These things run on for years and years, and they're left hanging over people, and that's detrimental as well. And in effect, justice is denied to all around.
Yeah, I think the concern is that the timeliness at which these things are dealt with, and the appropriateness of things being in disciplinary procedures where they may be a more appropriate procedure. Very often when we talk about discipline and disciplinary procedures in police services, the focus is always on the frontline men and women at the rank of Garda. Have you any particular comments or observations about your expectations as the incoming Commissioner about the performance of first-line supervisors, senior managers, leaders in the organisation, both staff members and attested members, in terms of leadership and management in the disciplinary process and their own performance as managers and as supervisors?
Well, if I step back from the discipline process and maybe just talk about behaviours and the impact on culture. Undoubtedly, the more senior you are in the organisation, the more people watch you. And if your behaviours aren't exemplary, if your behaviours fall below standard, or there's any doubt about the authenticity of the way you conduct your duties or the ethics, your ethical stance, well then that sets the standard, and sometimes a corrosive standard for all around. So I've made it clear from day one that I expect an exemplary standard from all of those in a leadership management position in the organisation. And I feel that I'm entitled to ask that. They volunteered for those roles. They went through processes, promotion processes, where in effect they did promise this, that they promised that they would be exemplars of the behaviours which that we want to see and I expect to see in the organisation. So I'm very clear about that. I have to say the issue about the performance of individuals isn't helped by the existing regime, which is only a discipline regime, and in effect I've only got the one tool in the toolbox there.
Well, look, I concur with you. I concur with you in what you've just said, and I mean clearly the culture of your organisation is set from the top.
Yes.
And it is important that all of the senior leaders march to that tune.
Yes, absolutely.
But that they do. So look, thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Noel. Commissioner, in a previous piece of work that we did last year, where the question of discipline was on the table, we offered a very strong view that performance management was the appropriate response when you have certain behaviours across the entire organisation. And we would repeat that view
Yes.
in the light of that discussion you just have. The other comment I would like to make is that I was very taken. In your earlier engagement, you spoke about districts and divisions in a corporate framework.
Yes.
And you might have a chat with Dave and see is there any corporate framework that might help him with that consistency question, because it is certainly somewhat problematic. I'm not expecting you to know the weeds of it, but there's a corporate framework just might help that consistency question on the discipline side, and I leave that thought with you. And Judith has a question.
Yeah, Commissioner, you're very welcome. And I join my colleagues in wishing you every success in your new role. My question is in relation to the piece of your report about the IT projects, and I hope it hasn't escaped your notice that in Policing Committee we've been having significant discussions and expressing concerns around the falling detection rates within the organisation. And I know this will require a consolidated effort right across the organisation. There's not one single solution. It requires a strategy with a number of strands. But one of the key strands that is much store is being put by is the investigations management system. And I note from your report that the go-live date has been deferred again to Q1 2019. So my concern, I suppose, is given that that's a key plank in improving detections, what happens in the meantime, and is this being given the organisational focus that it deserves, given the priority that it's given in the policing plan?
Before I address the IT issue, I think I should make some comments about data quality. So there is a lot of work ongoing in the organisation in respect of data quality, and the experience elsewhere is inevitably then the number of crimes that we have recorded actually increases, but also then the number of detections then subsequently also fall away. Now that is a result of seeking to improve the quality of our data, and I think that is a very valid thing to do. We're absolutely dependent on the quality of our data for our management of the organisation, but also then in terms of public confidence as well. People should be assured that what is reported to us is properly recorded, properly dealt with, and properly signed off in the end as well, and that they can be sure of our ethical and honest approach to that. The actual system itself, can I look to you, John, to answer the specific on that, please?
So as you've said, and as we've outlined in the report, the investigation management system has been deferred from Q4 to Q1. That is due to a scheduling issue with Pulse in terms of the transfer of existing investigations across. So there is quite an amount of work in terms of transferring all of our existing files. I think as late as yesterday we have 168,000 open investigations. So the scale and the complexity of the challenge in transferring them across from the Pulse system into the investigation management system is just proving a greater challenge than was originally anticipated. Notwithstanding that, work is going on in the southeastern region where the phased implementation will commence, and that training is going on in November of this year. So we do expect that the implementation of it will gather some pace. They have put in an added loop into it again, which adds to the complexity to ensure the data quality process is accurate. So rather than it being done automatically and doing it entirely through the IT system, there was a need to ensure that the accuracy of the data quality. So there's an added loop that goes into that, which also contributed to the delay. You will have heard us talk previously about our Pulse iterations, and in Pulse 6.8, which was introduced almost 2 years ago now at this stage, that introduced an added layer of oversight at district level in terms of the management of the day-to-day investigations. Earlier on this year, there was another Pulse iteration which we called Pulse 7.3, which addressed all of the data quality issues from a detection perspective. In the reports that we have provided, the net result of that was that the detections were deferred until the point of prosecution. So the classification of detection was deferred to a later stage. And if you look at the progress, that has improved over time. There is a specific detection improvement plan which has been issued to each Garda region, and they are dealing with that between now and the introduction of the IMS system, and we expect that the recent improvements that will continue to increase up until the introduction of the investigation management system, when the system will do that from an automated process.
I suppose my point is that it was important that you don't stand still awaiting this system being introduced, that you continue with the detections improvement plan, which of course we'll discuss more in committee. That was all I wanted to ask, Chair, on the report. Thank you.
Thanks, Judith. We're moving on anyway, so you have the floor. We have a number of items on our agenda under other business. That's not other business doesn't just mean that they're one-liners. They're quite significant pieces of business. And Judith's going to lead for us on two of them. So Judith, over to you.
Thanks, Chair. And it's timely, actually, that we've been talking about data quality because, Commissioner, you'll be aware, I'm sure, of the issues which gave rise to the authority commissioning report by Crowe Horwath into the wrongful issue of summonses regarding fixed charge notices and also the inflation of breath test figures. And these issues first started to come to light in 2014. The Crowe Horwath report was published almost a year ago, and it stated, amongst many other things, and I quote from the report directly, "Central to the successful rectification of these difficulties must be the determination of Garda members at all ranks to learn from the problems and to implement our recommendations without delay." So I have some general questions first and then some specifics, if I may. The Garda Síochána agreed as a priority in this year's policing plan to publish a comprehensive implementation plan of the recommendations by the end of Q1 of this year. Despite this being agreed as a priority, and despite all of the public confidence issues around the Crowe Horwath report, the authority has yet to receive a full implementation plan on which we can agree timelines and milestones. What we have received is an incomplete plan, just as late as the 14th of September, and then on Tuesday of this week, some timelines which we've yet to agree. So I'm not going to rehearse all of the public confidence issues around these matters. I'm sure you're well aware of them by now. And I do know that some action has been taken to address some of the recommendations, which is welcome. But I just want to invite you as a general comment regarding the overall pace of progress to date, whether it reflects the corporate focus that you, as Commissioner, would wish to see.
Well, I know this has been subject to a lot of concentration within the organisation, and David and John have provided me with updates on this. But certainly I do recognise that this is a major issue for us in terms of public confidence, and one that we will wish to see to be acting on and have completed as soon as possible. There's no doubt about my determination and the determination of this team in respect of that. I regret that there's been a delay, obviously, in providing you with the implementation plan that was promised through the policing plan, but we will act to rectify that as soon as possible in terms of the complete document being forwarded to you. But I can only say that I recognise the importance of this, and we'll wish to actually deal with this and, in effect, implement the recommendations, put in place the processes that are necessary, and make this a normal running of our business.
Thank you, and I welcome that. But just again, in the context of what you've said around ethics and data quality, is it your impression that there is an understanding of the need for quality data and that it's valued within the organisation?
Well, certainly people have spoken a lot to me about data quality and about how the processes that are in place overall to improve data quality. On Monday evening at NACE, I spoke with a roads policing unit who had conducted a large-scale roads policing operation, and they also were very seized of the reputational damage that had been done to the organisation, but personally the reputational damage had been done to them in terms of the great pride actually they took in the work that they do. So I think, beyond the organisational message, at an individual level, and I was talking to a couple of sergeants and 5 or 6 guards all in roads policing, you could see that they were seized of this matter, and they brought it up themselves as we were talking about the code of ethics. So it was at the forefront of their mind, and I can only give that as an example of what I've seen practically from very much operational officers on the front line. But I know then institutionally the focus that there is within the Strategic Transformation Office around data quality, plus then the focus that there is with the analysts as well. And so everybody literally that I talk to about our data, quality of information, all talk about the importance of it being ethical and accurate as well.
I have some further specific questions which you may wish to refer to colleagues, but in some specific areas, for example, there's a recommendation in the report to review all processes in relation to MIT checkpoints, and I understand from the implementation plan that we've received that this review started in November 2017, but it's still ongoing. I find that surprising in terms of the pace of the review. Would you or your colleagues like to comment on that specific recommendation?
Can I look at David just on the specifics of that?
I can take that, Judith. I can say that review process has completed. The document that you have, the only thing that's missing off it is actually the timelines. Those timelines have to be agreed with yourselves. I took it upon myself to contact the authority's office, and I on Tuesday evening this week I discussed it, or Monday or Tuesday evening this week I discussed it in length with one of your colleagues in the Policing Authority. They've asked me to go back and refine some of the timelines in respect of that in order to make it palatable for everybody to accept. Some of the timelines that we had were down as closed. While I understand why they're closed, it wasn't very apparent to the other person, and we had to try go back and look at those. In respect of the mid checkpoints, significant development has been done in respect of that on Pulse, so that no longer can you get into Pulse and put in false figures, or not false figures, but put in figures that are incorrect. because the machine itself won't allow it, number one, or number two, it will throw you back a query in respect of it. So a lot of work has been done around that, and a lot of the detail that was on Pulse previously to that in Pulse 7.2 has been eliminated to prevent information that was spurious or information that we didn't need from being collected. So a lot of work has been done in respect to that, and I am it's part of my daily job in respect of trying to make sure that all this has been done. And no more this morning in preparation for this afternoon, I went through a lot of the things in respect to ensure or to satisfy myself that what we said we were doing, we have done. And I think that it behoves me now to get a report to yourselves to clarify and satisfy yourselves the amount of work that has been done in respect to this, just to show the public and yourselves the confidence that I have in respect of developing the system forward.
Okay, and thank you for that, David. I suppose I'm struck by the Commissioner's comments about communication, and you need to communicate that the work that you've done around this to us, to give us the assurance, then we can, I guess, reassure the public also that there's some pace behind this. But one final very specific question. I note, and again it was mentioned in the Commissioner's monthly report about the mobility programme, yes. And that's intended to supersede many of the proposals that Horwath made, because it will overtake them with an IT solution, for example regarding telephone reporting, etc. But the mobility programme is still some distance away. It's still being piloted. That pilot has gone on for some time, and in the meantime the Horwath report says that many of the circumstances that gave rise to the fixed charge notice issue are still in place. So I guess my question is, what happens in the meantime until this mobility programme is introduced, and what confidence do you have that the issues identified won't recur? Can I
categorically reassure you here now that the issues that were identified in Crowe cannot reoccur by virtue of the fixes that have been put on Pulse. I probably need to demonstrate that to you personally to show you how it actually works, but the system you cannot, for argument's sake, you cannot create an incident now on Pulse, which, if we'd say it's a fixed charge notice, you cannot proceed to summons without going through a fixed charge notice. One of the recommendations from Crowe in respect of that was that the whole idea that we should be able to do a one-stop shop. So if I catch somebody for no insurance and a speeding on the one offence, that I should be able to proceed with that. The legislation won't allow us to do that, and I don't think that has been articulated to yourselves in the context of that from the legislation that or from the advices that we received from the DPP in respect to the matter. So I think that needs to be fed back to yourselves in respect of where we are. But I can categorically reassure you that the issues that we identified in those have been closed off from a Pulse perspective that cannot be allowed to happen again. That doesn't say that something else down the line won't happen, but I can assure you that the issues that are there have been closed off. And I think, to be honest, when I was reading the documentation for today's meeting and looking through the plan, that jumped out at me to say that I don't think you have an appreciation of the amount of work that has been done, and I need to fix that with a coherent plan back to yourselves.
And the sooner we can receive that, the better, David. But I do appreciate that unequivocal reassurance regarding recurrence. A final question on this area. In terms of communicating changes to legislation and changes to procedure, one of the issues was the weighty tomes that are sent out from headquarters with the expectation that officers and staff on the front line will read, digest and understand them. What progress has been made around making those user-friendly and communicating key information on legislative change that people at the front end of the business need to understand?
Yeah, that communication piece is actually a piece that we need to put a bit further to work with. We did one of the recommendations in the document that I gave you today was to try to give to fellas a how-to guide in respect of FCNs. We developed the FCN how-to guide. We circulated the FCN how-to guide, and as a result of the meeting on Monday, the question was asked was, how confident can I be that everybody on the ground understands exactly what's in the how-to guide? I can't get to that point at the moment as to how that was delivered on the ground, and that's one small piece of the jigsaw that I have to try and sort out. I do accept, if you take some of the legislation around road haulage, particularly, and around trailers, it is very complex and very complicated. We're working with the RSA at the moment to do up vignettes that we can put on the portal that will allow and help people understand qualities you're looking for when you have to deal with these. And only last week at the ploughing championship, the amount of questions that we fielded in respect of trailers and people not being in compliance with it, we brought that back to the Road Safety Authority, and they have agreed with us that they're going to do an information piece to the public to advise them in respect of what we are. So it is a challenge for us, but we are working on some ideas around that in respect of trying to make sure that that message is being delivered to the ground.
Chair, that concludes my questions on that particular part.
Thank you, Judith. Well, you still have the floor on the homicide item.
Okay. Well, we'll move on then to the homicide review, Commissioner, and I know you're, I'm sure, aware for some time now that the authority has been concerned about the accurate recording of homicides, and in 41 cases in particular where accuracy issues were identified. And I know that you fully understand that our focus throughout this whole process, or one of our key focuses, has been around the effective and timely investigation. And we have been repeatedly assured, both in public and private, that an effective investigation has taken place in each of the cases. And we've been briefed in committee on the progress of the review process. And may I say how much we welcome the transparency with which we are now being briefed. I understand at this stage 16 of the 41 cases have been reviewed, but notwithstanding the earlier repeated assurances and accepting that no investigation is perfect, I understand that there are some issues of concern emerging. So given your experience, would you like to make any observations on the review process to date and what gave rise to it?
Well, you are correct in such, at times, complex investigations. Something will be missed or something will go wrong, and it's the purpose of review to determine that and to identify new lines of inquiry or correct mistakes. Serious case review is used in a tactical sense to open up new lines of inquiry and to make sure lines of inquiry that exist were properly pursued. But in this case, we are in effect doing a QA, quality assurance approach to all of these cases, and in doing so, we are finding issues both minor and some more major, and where those are found, they are being reported in full to the policing authority through the committee that you've mentioned, and if needs be, then they can report on to the other appropriate authorities, be that the coroner or indeed, if necessary, the Director of Public Prosecutions. But we're not at that position as yet. So this is very much sensitive area. These investigations all touch upon the death of someone's loved one. So it is a sensitive area. But as far as we can, we've engaged in an open manner with yourselves, and that's been appropriate. But we are holding ourselves entirely to account for our performances in the area. But it is an area where, because of its complexity and maybe issues of either failure in terms of systemic or an individual human failing, we will find stuff. There's no doubt about that. And it's good to find it, because then when it's found, we can see what we can do to repair the situation. So it's a good process in terms of learning for the organisation or learning for individuals, and it gives us an opportunity to further develop all our forms of homicide investigation, right through to suicide, road deaths, and on into manslaughter and murder.
Could you just say a little more then about how the learning that's coming out of these reviews is being fed into SIO training, etc.? Because I know the review team are coming up with a number of fast-track recommendations, as it were, and then slower time recommendations. How are those being fed into the organisation? So
the learning would flow into, I would say, three separate categories. So there's organisational wide learning. So a system or process that has to be resolved where we found that there's been a deficiency. There also then can be investigative failings, or which can be personal but also systemic in what can be very large scale investigations. So that would be principally for those who are investigating the actual events themselves. But there are also then issues for frontline responders, so those who would first attend the scene and people talk about the golden hour, but there is something very important about the initial response, the initial securing of first accounts, the initial securing of the scene, and any suspects as well. And there are often learning points there as well, which are for, in effect, patrol officers, and we have to build that into their training and in effect proclamate that good practice throughout the organisation. So in doing this work, we've undertaken that those learning points should be shared. There's a lot of effort going into this, and it would just be a sin in itself to lose this opportunity to advance our approach to these major investigations.
So who on the executive team is taking ownership of the actions and making sure that the recommendations are actually implemented?
That's what John here.
So we have, in a number of the recommendations that have been issued, they have been fast-tracked in terms of straight in the training manual in the Garda College has been updated. The SIO courses have been updated and the training approach has been changed with that. In the more general areas, there have been some directives issued to the wider organisation in terms of some of the more simpler basic lessons to be learned. I think in the area of data quality, which was crucial in this area, again we mentioned some of the IT fixes which have kind of forced us down a certain direction in this regard. There is also a chief data officer has been appointed to the organisation on a temporary basis, on a contract basis, but that person has commenced duty, has commenced work last week. So that again is another aspect and another step and another loop in terms of improving our data quality. In terms of the reviews that are done, in terms of these ongoing reviews that are done in investigations, we have the Serious Crime Review team that can do the more comprehensive reviews. We have trained a considerable number of people around the organisation doing an interim review. We've brought people over from the UK and that. So there's been a number of measures that have been taken already, and those changes will continue as the further recommendations are received.
I know, Commissioner, you've mentioned yourself the sensitivity around these issues, and it's not my intention to get into individual cases in any way, but as each case is reviewed and as issues emerge, there may be other agencies you'll need to speak to, as you've already alluded to, but there are also families involved, and I know at the forefront of your mind will be the confidence of the families.
Yes,
can you just give us some reassurance around that?
Yeah, we have, in the earlier part, at the earlier stages of this review, we were in contact with each and every one of the families directly involved, and we have kept them abreast of all of the developments as they have evolved over time. So it's something we're very conscious of, and it's something that we have specifically tasked the review team with doing, and indeed the local district officer has taken that action on from day one. And as it evolves, as there are changes, we will continue to keep those people abreast. It is critically important and something we're very conscious of in this review, but also in the wider context of all of the victims of crime that we come across. How we support them through that dreadful experience is a real concern to us, both in this case but also in the wider context.
Okay, I just want to maybe reiterate some comments I made in the public meeting in February of this year regarding the state's positive duty to protect life. And it is important we remember that this original piece of proactive analytical work on domestic homicides has been overtaken by the priority of resolving data quality issues and looking at the investigations. But the strong rationale for this review into domestic homicides remains, and there are lessons to be learnt from domestic homicides which can inform policy and protect potential victims in the future, and indeed protect first responders who are dispatched to scenes of such crimes. And it's becoming more and more clear that some critically important, potentially life-saving information is incomplete, inaccurate, or absent from Garda IT systems. So previous information, for example, on domestic incidents at the same address as a homicide occurrence may not be available to first responders. And the review right now, not in February, but right now, states that this remains a risk for the Garda Síochána and requires, quote, further examination and associated policy, unquote. So that has implications both for public protection, for vulnerable victims, and for officer safety. So can I repeat the question I asked in February? Do you have a time-bound, rigorous plan to fully scope the need to update post records in such cases, and that these records will be updated without delay? Can you give us that assurance?
We have a procedure in place where we are examining to deal with the recommendations that we're talking about and the implementation of all of those recommendations. That is in place. The establishment of the Garda National Protective Services Bureau, as an interim measure, have set up a specific operation where we deal with the most serious of those cases, and we have specific action taken in relation to that. There is a piece of work ongoing to extend that across the entire organisation, and we've talked previously about the dynamic risk assessment. There is some work going on as we speak in relation to that, and it is intended that will be rolled out across the entire organisation, so all of our front line staff will receive specific training in domestic violence issues. In relation to the IT piece, that work, because of the information, is in a number of different locations. It's not an easy task to coordinate it all together, but as we say, we have some of it has been done on a manual basis at this stage, and we hope that into the future we will make that more automated, and we will make it simpler and easier for the people on the front line. The second element of it, as the divisional protective service units are rolled out, there is 4 of them in place at this stage. I think there's a minimum of another 4 will roll out this year. I think it will be closer to 8 or 9. And again, the intention being that by the end of next year they will be rolled out nationally, and the information will improve as the specialism and the specialisation and the advanced training that are provided in those areas, in those divisions, that will improve the information that's available across the organisation. But the task of joining up all of the information within the organisation is a piece of work that's ongoing, and it is probably going to take some time. It's not. I'm not in a position here to tell you today exactly when that work will be done, but it is a priority that has been done as soon as possible.
Perhaps if I can put it this way, are we any further forward now in September than we were when I asked the question in February?
Yes, we are, and as I said, we have a specific operation ongoing within the National Protective Service Unit, which a team of people are tasked with identifying the more serious repeat offenders and the more serious individuals that may pose a threat or a risk to society, and specific action plans are in place for each and every one of those.
I think, Chair, it's something we'll probably return to in more detail in committee, but thank you.
I think that's right. Thank you, Judith. I suppose, Commissioner, except this is all relatively new to you, but you do need to be aware that this is an issue that has been on the authorities' agenda and will remain on the authorities' agenda for some time to come. I think the earlier discussion you had with one of my colleagues about data quality is pertinent here. There was a sense in our early engagement that this issue was being treated as simply a matter of quality and classification, but it's data quality with consequences is what we're concerned about, and quality of investigations and risk. Yeah. And I do want to note, as I did at our last meeting in public, that we're very contented with the work being done led by Chief Superintendent Sutton in relation to these cases. The work is progressing painstakingly and thoroughly. The team working seems to be really sound and solid. So we're very contented with that piece of work, and I wouldn't want you to misunderstand the questions, but the content of the work clearly needs to continue, and your organisation is now investing a serious amount of time, and therefore the learning needs to be captured and not just treated as an exercise to try and stop us asking questions. And I know you wouldn't do that, but it is. I just want to make the connections for you, because this has been running on our agenda now for a very long time, but it will continue as a standing item.
And we ourselves recognise the importance of this. It's come before our senior leadership team on the 10th of October about our overall approach to domestic abuse. I think there's a recognition amongst the senior leadership team that this is an area of growing concern in terms of its prevalence, but also then when we look at this review in particular, it highlights the issues that have been already ventilated, and we wanted to just sit down as a group and see where we go next with this to really get a strong handle on it, and domestic abuse and our approach to it, and how we protect victims and deal with perpetrators is going to be central to my tenure. So I look forward to our engagement in this, because I know that both groups want to do our best to protect the victims from domestic abuse.
Thank you, Commissioner. The final other business item we have relates to a number of public order issues, and Bob is going to lead for us on those.
Thanks, Chair. And just before leaving the question which you've just left, which you've just addressed, I think it's important also to remember that matters were emphatically confirmed to us both in private and in public, with increasingly assertive emphasis, that subsequent circumstances have shown not to have been well founded, and we weren't being bloody-minded when we were being persistent, and I think that's important to recall as well. I want to refer to three separate points. Two of them will relate to something long before your arrival, and one to something more recent, and I should echo what everybody else has said in offering you warmest congratulations and best wishes. Gomorrah to the Gradam. And I hope that in all of the busyness you have time to enjoy it. Your colleagues may have believed and will certainly have wished that the issues on Cosán from 2014 had been put to bed. Now, if they were put to bed, they're having a restless night because they're not asleep. And there are two issues that I want to address. The first is, when Assistant Commissioner O'Brien was asked to investigate the events in Kiltalone in 2014, well, the events took place in 2014. Assistant Commissioner O'Brien was asked to investigate them last year. There were 4 terms of reference, one of which was the presentation of evidence at the Circuit Court. Now, at the time of AC O'Brien's investigation, court proceedings were live, and therefore he was precluded from pursuing the presentation of evidence. By the time his report had been submitted, at the direction of the judge, the court cases had been discontinued. And we have raised the question on several occasions throughout this year as to what the status of that term of reference is. It was suggested that we might have been interfering with the courts, or that the Garda Síochána might be interfering with the independence of the courts if it were to look at the question of the presentation of evidence. But as we don't know if anything has been done in relation to that. Now that the court cases have been dropped, there were discussions with the DPP, there appears to be no reason whatsoever why that shouldn't be addressed. But as far as we can establish, nothing has happened. And I wonder, is it the case that that term of reference is simply no longer being addressed? If so, is there a rationale for that approach? One would have thought that given the circumstances, that the initial intention that the presentation of evidence would be a subject of review would be an important learning point at the very least for the organisation. And it would be really useful to know, and it would be a great reassurance if we could be told that that intention has not been discarded. The second part of that is the recent report submitted by Assistant Commissioner Leahy in response to a request made of him in his capacity as Assistant Commissioner for the Dublin Metropolitan Region for his observations on the recommendations contained in Barry O'Brien's report. Now, I said at the last time we talked about this, the second last time, at the April public meeting, that the O'Brien report was a good report. It didn't paint a pretty picture, but it was a good, open, frank report. And I think that Assistant Commissioner Leahy's report is also welcome in its openness. It doesn't reinvestigate, doesn't re-review. It strengthens, if anything. The evaluation is stronger than that which was contained in A.C. O'Brien's report, in that he doesn't agree that it might be characterised as a qualified success. And he has a number of strong things to say. He knows what he wrote. But he makes recommendations about the implementation of some of the recommendations made by Barry O'Brien. And now we understand that all of those recommendations are going to be put in a composite document, which will itself be the subject of an implementation plan. And it would be really interesting to know exactly what is going to happen as a consequence of this, because that has consequences for the third issue that I want to turn to.
Okay. I looked at Barry, and just in respect of the first point then you raised in court proceedings and the evidence that was provided.
Yes, just in relation to that, thank you, Bob. Yes, the report came up for a substantive discussion in February of this year, and the issue in respect of the evidence that was tendered at the trial was the only outstanding matter. Arising from that meeting, I wrote to the Office of Director of Public Prosecutions in respect of the way forward to deal with that. An essential element of that would be to obtain a transcript or portions of transcript of the trial of which the allegations were made. In that regard, I have encountered a difficulty insofar as an application for a transcript from a trial comes under a very strict criteria and is provided under legislation. And unfortunately, the difficulty is that the requirement, say for example, for a review from a lessons learned point of view, wouldn't, in the view of our own personnel, we've sought legal advice within our own legal section, wouldn't come in within the threshold for the courts to grant it. So I have a difficulty in respect of that, in respect of the applying, because I don't believe the courts would authorise the transcript. Now I've sought legal advice, and again, that is the position with regards to that.
I have three difficulties with that answer, and perhaps there would be more if I had more time to think, but three strike me immediately. The first is, it raises the fundamental question as to why this was a term of reference in the first instance. If the Garda Síochána, of all people, might have known that there would be a disability of such an order that would prevent engagement with it. The second difficulty is restricting oneself, as the self-limiting idea that because you believe this might not reach the threshold to persuade the court, why not ask the court and test the court's willingness to engage with the National Police Service to consider whether there could be learning from this. And the third point is, these transcripts are in the public domain. They're on websites. The Garda Síochána may not want to use them, that may have been improperly or inappropriately put on a website, but they are there. And it seems just passing strange to me that something which was a term of reference, considered to be, and one imagined that that was an issue that was carefully reflected on when the initial investigation was established. And it was item 3 of 4, it wasn't an add-on. That the perceived importance of that issue at the time that the investigation was established, this is not a criticism of the investigation, is now apparently no longer of such significance that the organisation simply forms the view that the courts would deem it not to meet the threshold. And it seems to me to be a self-denying ordinance, which is completely out of kilter with the fact that it was a term of reference to begin with. And it raises questions to which I have no answers and which, to be honest, I don't understand.
Can I then perhaps?
Yeah, well, I was wondering, maybe there's a way through. If we are going to have in effect, lessons learned, and we set it out in that context, in effect, yes, I understand parts of the transcript, people took their own transcripts and have put those out there, but even setting those aside, we do have access to the members' notes and the evidence that they produced, and if we start there, but we start there from a basis of this is, and for the purpose of informing what criminal justice strategies in respect of public order events might look like in the future, that would be a good place to start. And maybe some of my earlier comments about only having the one thing that we do in the organisations, which is discipline, as opposed to, in effect, wanting to be a learning organisation, also pertain here. We only have the one tool in the toolbox. It's very hard to convince people that we're going to go down a different route. So if I said to Barry, perhaps to explore whether we can actually do a lessons learned type approach to this is entirely reasonable and actually probably good for us in terms of where our policy is at the moment, because the criminal justice element of any public order operation is central to it, because those who create disorder, you always want to bring them before the courts for whatever offences that you're able to gain evidence for. So there is actually a very effective, our efficiency lies in this and about how effective we are in public order operations. So if we can take that away, an alternative approach here, then we can see then what we're able to achieve then.
Well, I welcome that very much, because we don't know what it was that prompted the inclusion of that in the terms of reference, but it seems to us that it is entirely undesirable not to use the opportunity to see if there are lessons to be learned, at the very least. And I appreciate what you've said, Commissioner, and thank you for that. And as I said, this is not a critique of the investigation, or indeed of Pat Leahy's commentary on it. But then can I come to that next bit and get a sense of where the next step is, or the steps are, because AC Leahy endorses the report, strengthens his judgment of the position slightly, identifies all of the issues that were raised in the initial report, sees some areas where initiatives could be, and some have been already taken in the Dublin metropolitan region, identifies some that should be dealt with by the Chief Superintendent, who has responsibility for public order nationally. And in respect of some of them, identifies the need for urgency and haste in implementing some of the proposals in the initial report and some of the additional recommendations that are contained in Assistant Commissioner Leahy's response to it. And I just wonder, where do we stand now? Because there are issues in relation to command and control, issues in relation to communication, issues in relation to what he describes as pre-event competence that are very relevant. And it would be good to know where is there going to be a further lengthy process, because all of this happened in 2014. This report was December, I think, 2017.
It was requested as a consequence of the proceedings, which was in July 2017 and was concluded in October.
We got it in. We got a summary in December. We got the active document in February. Just to get a sense of what's going to happen.
Okay, so if we look to Paddy then to come fill in the gaps.
Afternoon, Bob. I can tell you, Bob, you're right. Some actions have already taken place, and I suppose some of the key actions that arose and that we've discussed previously in terms of peaceful crowd management, which may have had an effect on the day. That is now part of the standard training in the Garda College for recruits. So everybody coming out now has that. That started in July of this year. also across each division in the Dublin Metropolitan Region. That commenced in July of this year and was very effectively used during the Pope's visit. So it is something that has happened. All of the issues that were identified locally in the sub-district within which Cosán took place, and there was a long list of them, they've all been addressed by the local divisional officer, and other actions are taking place all the time. As you know, the Chief Superintendent and his deputy, who are the two people that are the key actors in public order nationally, have taken this report. They've been tasked to look at the implications of implementing it. They're implementing as they go. There are some aspects of it that need to go before the senior leadership team, and I think we're probably in a good space now with the new Commissioner coming in to put those issues before the strategic leadership team for consideration and action, because there are some national actions that need to take place around this, and you're familiar with the report yourself. So it is making progress. On top of that, we have the North Frederick Street incident took place very recently. That has been fully reviewed, and there's some learning coming out of that. And that has also been put on the task list for the team that are working on Cosán. But I expect this to happen much quicker. There are 10 recommendations coming out of this that we will address in the short term.
Thank you. Can we take it then that the recommendations made by Barry O'Brien in his report, which have been strengthened, as I say, and added to a little in the Pat Leahy commentary or response, that all of those recommendations are accepted and will be implemented? And
yes.
Because some of them are being urged to be addressed by the senior leadership team and by the executive, as I say, as a matter of urgency or with haste.
Yeah.
Do I take it that they're accepted?
Yes, well done, John.
I think at a previous meeting here, Bob, we were asked that question, and the then Commissioner and the senior leadership team accepted the recommendations and accepted that action would be taken to implement them. I think what Paddy is talking about now is the detail around that, but there's no suggestion that the recommendation is not being accepted.
Okay, well that also is welcome. That there is that it will be the implementation will be accelerated, if anything, rather than. Now, two things were told to us. The first was in the discussion that took place variously in February or April or June. This has a long life. Was that circumstances were very dramatically different now from 2014, and that what happened then couldn't really happen now. That the critical incident management policy, that public order training, that all of that steps had been taken place, and there was a coherence and a policy base and a practice base which would ensure that these things did not happen, that command and control communications issues had been dealt with. I noted in passing that although there was a view that a standing public order unit was not deemed necessary, AC Leahy recommends in his report that there should be a standing public order unit in Dublin on a daily, 7 days a week basis. In parenthesis, how confident are you that A, that can be done, and B, that public order provision is adequate in other parts of the country? But we then come to the events of earlier this month in North Frederick Street, about which I know nothing more than what I've read in the newspapers, either by way of or seen in the media generally, media reports and the Commissioner's welcome statement in relation to it, and the observations by the Chair of the authority. Does that indicate that all is not quite right? That all of the policy base is not firmly embedded? That all of the developments that were said to have taken place may not actually be as solidly based? Because this wasn't, as some may have wanted to interpret the Commissioner's statement, as being about dress code or proper dress. This was about the extent to which there was a command system in operation. Public order units don't turn up unsupervised. And if it was about the safety, or if the action that was taken was about the safety of individuals, what comparable concern was expressed about the safety of other Garda members who were on site at the time, but who weren't members of a public order unit? And was there a single point of command over all Garda members who were present at the event? I know that you've looked for a report, and it may be that the report isn't ready and that there are things you don't want to address before you've seen that report. But it seems to me that there's a discontinuity, at the very least, between the assurances that we were given earlier this year, repeatedly at a number of public meetings and private meetings, and what happened on the ground in relation to North Frederick Street.
Well, in fairness, I have received a report in respect of the incident, and there is a conversation now between me and AC Leakey in respect of that. And I do recognise the points that you raised with me, and that's why I asked specifically for a report into the matter, because you are right, it goes beyond formal code of dress, but actually the preparation for this. But in some ways, the officers on the ground were placed in an invidious situation, because the enforcement of a private, in effect, bill that's been, or a civil bill that's been received by an agent for that property. Our only function is is in effect to keep the peace and prevent a breach of the peace. And I think the piece that strikes me about that is that operation, in terms of the agent actually reoccupying their property and securing it, that seemed to go well. What then happened then was, in effect, others arrived who wished to agitate, and then the situation became increasingly ugly from there on in. But you do raise valid points about the style of the operation and in terms of just the numbers who were there and the actual command and control and appearance of it. And so I've only received the report yesterday, and I've hardly had time actually to read and digest it myself. It's quite considerable in terms of the recommendations it makes. We are likely to have further of these, and I think we need, as is suggested in it, a public-facing account of what our responsibilities and roles are in these situations, because we are placed in a pretty difficult position. There's the actual managing the situation, but then managing, obviously, protesters who arrive. The people who were in the property left when required to do so, and left really without issue, and all was good and peaceful. But then others arrived, and but that time and early evening, now that was particularly of our choosing either, and that put us in a difficult place, because you're in the middle almost of, well, tail end of a rush hour, and people are mobile and available to support that, and wouldn't be a time of our choosing, for instance. And certainly there was issues about our appearance and the style and the manner in which we went about it, which were of concern to me. But we can report back further to the authority in this, because in some ways it's a worked example of how well the previous recommendations and what we've set out in policy has worked or not worked.
Yeah, and perhaps when you, I mean, just in passing, a spontaneous thought was that if this were 6 a.m. as opposed to 6 p.m. in the middle of rush hour, there might have been a different circumstance. I'm not suggesting that things should be done under cover of darkness, on the contrary. But that the timing seemed at the very least to be unhelpful, even to facilitate a
yes.
democratic protest, which is a constitutional entitlement. But perhaps when you are reporting back to us, you might clarify the issue of the command.
Yes.
And the extent, not just of the public order unit, but of the entire Garda presence, of the extent to which, or the source of the decision-making in relation to the way in which the public order unit members presented themselves and represented themselves, and your judgment as to the extent to which what was, again, an assurance given that on public order issues all the lessons had been learned and the policies had been ordered and the training had been undertaken, and we got a very, as well as assurances here, we got a very useful presentation about the public order issue several months ago, and that level of assurance was available. And what was it that caused the gap. And so we look forward to receiving that as early as possible.
Well, it will be as early and quickly as possible, because we are seized of this. This is a very emotive issue, and we literally don't know when the next one is going to arrive. So, we want to, and all of us want to be in a position where we're seen to police these and seen to be in a position where it's entirely impartial, our actions, and we aren't identified with, in effect, some of the slogans that have been put against us in terms of what our responsibilities are. Our responsibilities are to prevent crime, but also to preserve the peace.
And we are acutely conscious of the extent, not only in the North Frederick Street context, but also in the Cosán context. And in any such circumstances, the extent to which Garda members who were on duty, who were preserving the peace, can themselves be at grave risk. And that is an important part of the consideration as well.
And it was a risk scenario. An individual was assaulted, another one has been subsequently intimidated, another individual guard was subject to racist abuse on the night as well. And that gives a flavour of just how difficult these events are, and that's why I know all of us are seized of this, and we will quickly respond to you. You're not going to be waiting months for this. We want to be in a position to be standing on sure ground around where our policy is and what policy we have, in particular around these sorts of events. We can anticipate, and it's reasonable to anticipate there's going to be more events such as these. But may I also point out that in subsequent protests, Take Back the City protests, we have facilitated protest, we have facilitated people's democratic right to protest in the city centre, and that's been done with policing operations which have been entirely successful in terms of keeping the peace and managing those particular demonstrations.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Bob. I would just like to reiterate that point, Commissioner. We fully appreciate the balancing act that's involved here, and in my remarks at the time I indicated that this is a really difficult job for the Garda Síochána, and that it's not going to be the last time there will be court orders to be served, unfortunately, given the environment that we're in economically. And so in the same vein as our earlier conversation around homicide, the reason we're making the connections is for lessons learned, and given that these challenges tend to come around again and again, the saying about what happens when people keep repeating the same things and what that's the definition of. So it's in that vein that we're pursuing these matters. I would also like, on behalf of the authority, to ask you to accept our condemnation of the social media intimidation of your officers. It's not something that we would in any respect condone, and it's just unacceptable, and it's wrong. And I was pleased to note that you'd ordered an investigation into that dimension of the event as well. Effective policing of the right to protest has to also be respected by the protesters, and that's if it's going to work in everybody's interest. So that's just something that I would like you to take away on behalf of the authority and perhaps convey it to the officers concerned. I want to note for the record, just for the information of the audience, that you briefed us in private session in relation to matters in our Snook Throne, and we appreciated that you shared that with us. I'd like to just let you know that we are, in our private discussion this morning, we had a conversation, and we decided, in accordance with the Act, the Garda Síochána Act, that we would task the Garda Inspectorate to have a look at the handling of spontaneous public order issues. It's not something they've covered in detail in an inspection report before, and we see it as quite a narrow piece of work. Obviously, we've had the day exposition of the policies, and so you're well advanced in terms of the material that would be availed of by the inspectorate in doing that work.
Well, maybe just a point of clarification, because I think if we had to choose a title for North Frederick Street, it would be pre-planned. So because there was an element of us getting notice of that, so just sort of for the fullness of that inspection.
Okay, we'll engage with you around the terms of reference to make sure that it is full. And thank you for that contribution, because So I just wanted to say that to you.
Yeah.
We've already met the Chief Inspector about it. We just haven't settled the final terms of reference. So we'll be talking to Mark Toland and yourself about that. Any other business from any of my colleagues? Commissioner, I'm very conscious that we've hit you with an awful lot in your first month, your first meeting in your first month. Perhaps it's because we haven't had a meeting in August. There's been a bit of a build-up. Maybe that's why we tend to meet, obviously, the public meetings, but we also tend to have ones in between. We even found in our own work this morning that we had a lot of catching up to do in terms of our own responsibilities. So I apologise if we've hit you with an awful lot. It's been a long meeting. On behalf of my colleagues, can I thank you and your team for the manner in which you've engaged with us, as always. And we're adjourned, meeting in private in October and in public in November.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner.
Thank you.